the keeper of the Whisperlight. The valley was called the Stillness. It was not a place of sharp mountains or dramatic canyons. Instead, it was a wide, soft basin, a gentle cupping of the earth, as if a great, kind hand had pressed down into the land and left its impression. And into this basin, every single evening without fail, a mist would roll in. It did not come from the sea, for the sea was hundreds of miles away. It seemed instead to rise from the earth itself, a soft, pearlescent exhalation from the rich soil, the damp stones, and the leaves of the ancient, silver-barked trees that fringed the valley's rim. This mist was not a cold or lonely thing. It was a blanket. It was thick and downy, muffling all the world's sharp sounds, turning the late afternoon gold into a muted rose gold, and then, as the sun dipped, into a deep, hazy lavender. By the time the first stars pricked the sky, the valley floor would be a complete sea of white, opaque and calm, rising 100 feet high, and in the very center of this sea of mist, on a solitary island of dark, mossy rock, stood the tower. It was known as the Whisperlight Beacon. It was round, made of smooth gray river stone, and it rose 300 feet into the quiet air, high above the layer of mist. At its very top was a lantern room made of glass and polished bronze, and inside it a light glowed. It did not flash or spin like a coastal lighthouse. It simply pulsed. It was a soft, steady pulse of silvery-blue light, like a slow heartbeat, sending gentle, encompassing waves of light across the surface of the mist sea. The keeper of this light was a man named Elias. Elias was a man who fit the stillness. He was not old, but he moved with the unhurried grace of someone who has lived by the slow rhythm of dusk and dawn for a very long time. He was quiet, not because he was shy, but because he found the sounds of the valley, the settling of the stones, the rustle of his own clothes, the sigh of the mist, to be conversation enough. He had gentle hands and kind eyes, and his task, his only task, was to tend the light. Our story begins as the day is ending. Elias stood at the base of the tower, by the heavy, arched doorway of ancient dark wood. He was breathing in the evening air. The sun was just a sliver of deep orange over the western rim of the valley. He could smell the transformation. The sun-warmed scent of pine and dry grass was fading, being replaced by the cool, damp perfume of night-blooming jasmine, moss, and the clean mineral scent of the rising mist. It was swirling around his ankles, cool and soft as silk. He watched it for a long moment, this nightly arrival. It was his companion. It was his signal. With a soft sigh of contentment, Elias turned and stepped inside the tower. The heavy door closed with a deep, resonant thud, a sound of finality, of safety. The world outside was muffled, and the world inside began. The base of the tower was cool and smelled of damp stone, beeswax, and dried herbs. This was the storage level. Barrels of flour, sacks of beans, and crates of apples lined one wall, and from the curved ceiling hung bunches of dried lavender, chamomile, and rosemary, their faint, dusty scents mingling in the still air. Elias did not need to light a lamp here. He knew his way by heart, and besides, the tower was not truly dark. Faint light always trickled down the central spiral staircase from the windows far above. His footsteps made an almost soundless padding on the worn stone floor. He checked the latch on a window, though it was never unlocked. He ran a hand over a barrel of oats, feeling the rough wood. All was in order. All was as it should be. He moved to the staircase. It was the tower's spine, a helix of stone steps that wound its way up and up, each step worn smooth and slightly concave in the middle from generations of keepers before him. He placed his hand on the cool, smooth stone of the central pillar and began to climb. He did not hurry. The climb was the first part of his ritual. Up he went, his steps a soft, steady shuff, 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 on the stone. The air grew a little warmer as he ascended past the storage level. He came to the first landing, his living quarters. Here the tower was cozier. There were thick woven rugs on the floor, a deep, comfortable-looking bed built into the curve of the wall with a heavy quilt of soft wool, and a small fireplace, dark and cool now in the mild evening. A wooden table held a single unlit beeswax candle and a book. A simple wardrobe stood against the wall. Elias paused, running his hand over the quilt. It was soft. He would return here, when his work was done, when the sun was new. But not yet. He continued his climb. The steps felt familiar and solid beneath his feet. Shuff, shuff, shuff. The next level was the kitchen and pantry. It was a round, warm room, and it smelled wonderful. It smelled of baking bread. He had a loaf in the slow oven, a small clay box that used the residual heat from the day. It also smelled of apples and cinnamon. Jars of honey, preserves, and pickled vegetables lined the shelves, their colors glowing like jewels in the dim light. The deep purple of blackberry jam, the sunny gold of peaches. Elias was not hungry, but part of the ritual was sustenance. He moved to the small oven, opened its thick door, and a wave of gentle warmth and the comforting scent of yeast and toasted grain washed over him. He took out the small, perfectly browned loaf. He placed it on a wooden board and cut a single, thick slice. He spread it with a little fresh, pale butter, which melted instantly into the warm crumb. He sat on a small stool by the window and ate. He ate slowly, mindfully. He tasted the crisp crust, the soft interior, the sweet, creamy butter. Outside the window, the mist had now risen halfway up the tower. He was eating in a cloud. It was like living inside a pearl. The world was hushed. The only sound was the soft sound of his own chewing and the quiet intake of his breath. When he was finished, he wiped the crumbs from the board into his hand and tossed them onto the outer windowsill. A small gray bird, a mist finch, was waiting. It chirped a note of thanks, pecked at the crumbs, and vanished back into the white. Elias washed his hands in a small stone basin, the water cool and clear. He dried them on a soft linen towel. He felt calm, centered, and ready. He returned to the staircase and continued his ascent. Shuff, shuff, shuff. The air was changing again. It was growing cooler, but also lighter. The smell of stone and herbs was being replaced by a new scent, one that was dry and papery, with a hint of vanilla and old leather. He had reached his favorite room, the library. The library was 2 levels high, its walls completely, utterly lined with books. Thousands of them. Books with leather bindings, books with cloth bindings, books with no bindings at all, just scrolls tucked into wooden cubbies. A rolling ladder was attached to a brass rail that circled the room, and 2 deep, overstuffed armchairs sat near a large, curved window. This was the heart of the tower's history. Every keeper who had ever lived here had left their marks, their journals, their favorite collections of poetry or manuals on botany. Elias did not stop to read an adventure. His adventures were of a quieter sort. He walked to a specific shelf, his fingers tracing the spines of the books. He was looking for one in particular. He found it. It was a slim volume bound in soft blue-gray leather. It was titled A Catalogue of Mist-Moths. He opened it. The paper was thick and creamy. He turned to a page with a beautiful detailed illustration of a moth with wings like powdered silver and antennae like tiny pale ferns. The Luna veil. It was said to only appear on nights when the stars were bright enough to shine through the mist. Perhaps he would see one tonight. He read the description, his lips moving silently, and drawn not to flame but to the softest of glows. It navigates by starlight reflected on dew. Its wings, when in motion, make no sound at all. He smiled, a small private smile. He loved the quiet creatures of his world. He closed the book. the woof of its pages a soft, breathy sound in the quiet room. He gently slid it back into its place. He felt a sense, new line ence, feeling of connection to the keeper who, perhaps 100 years ago, had sat in this very room and painstakingly painted that moth. He felt the pull. The sun was gone. It was time. He left the library, the scent of paper fading, and climbed the final set of stairs. These were narrower, steeper. The air grew cooler and cleaner. He could smell the bronze of the lantern room and the ozone-like scent of the open sky. He reached the final door, a small round hatch made of brass. He turned its wheel-like handle. With a well-oiled metallic snick, it opened. Elias climbed the last few steps and emerged into the lantern room. It was a magnificent space. It was a dome, faceted with thick triangular panes of glass, held together by a strong, elegant framework of dark, polished bronze. It felt like being inside the top of a giant crystal, and because he was now fully above the mist, the view was breathtaking. He was on an island of stone in a vast, limitless ocean of white. The mist stretched out in every direction, luminous and still. Its surface rippled like wind-blown snow. And above was the sky. The sky was a deep, velvet, impossible indigo, and it was filled with stars. Not the pale, scattered stars of a city, but a thick, glittering dust of diamonds, so many they seemed to merge into rivers of light. The Milky Way was a brilliant, shimmering ribbon. Elias stood for a full minute, just breathing. He breathed in the cold, clear air of the upper atmosphere. He let the immensity of the silence and the light wash over him, clearing his mind completely. In the very center of the room, on a three-legged pedestal of bronze, sat the light. It was not a bulb or a fire. It was a crystal, a large, beautiful football-sized crystal, which, in its dormant state, looked like a cloudy piece of quartz. It was opaque, milky, and cool to the touch. This was the Lumen-stone. Elias began his final ritual. First, he moved around the room with a soft, lint-free cloth. He polished the inside of every glass pane. The glass was already clean, but this was the ritual. His movements were slow, circular, practiced. The cloth made a faint, whispering swish, swish sound. As he polished, he looked out at the stars, naming the constellations he knew. The Keeper, the River, the Silent Moth. Second, he polished the bronze framework. He had a small pot of beeswax polish, and he worked it into the metal until it gleamed new line ensed, with a deep reddish gold luster. The room filled with the faint, sweet smell of honey. Finally, he turned to the Lumen-stone. He stood before it. From a small leather pouch at his belt, he took two things. The first was a small, perfectly smooth, egg-shaped river stone. The second was a tiny vial of what looked like clear water. It was, in fact, dew, which he collected at dawn from the leaves of a single ancient rose bush that grew at the tower's base. He placed the smooth river stone against the side of the Lumen-stone. Then he uncorked the vial and let a single perfect drop of the dew fall onto the very top of the crystal. For a second, nothing happened. Then a sound began. It was not a noise, but a tone, a low resonant hum, like a perfectly struck tuning fork or a monk's deep chant. It was a sound you felt in your chest more than you heard with your ears. The milky, opaque crystal began to change. A light woke up inside it. It was not a yellow light or a white light. It was a soft silvery blue. The cloudiness within the stone began to swirl, to part, like mist clearing from a valley. The stone became clearer, brighter, until it was no longer a dull quartz but a brilliant, flawless sapphire, glowing with a powerful, yet gentle, inner light. The hum grew a little, then settled into a steady, comforting vibration. The light was awake. Elias took a deep, satisfied breath. He stepped back from the pedestal and moved to a small alcove where he kept a kettle and a tin of tea. He measured out a pinch of dried chamomile flowers and lavender buds into a small clay mug. He poured hot water from a thermos, prepared earlier in his kitchen, and the room instantly filled with the sweet, sleepy scent of the herbs. He took his mug and went to sit in a simple wooden chair that he had placed by the glass, overlooking the mist sea. He sat. He sipped his tea, and he watched. This was his job, to be present, to be a witness, to be the stillness that held the light. The Lumen-stone began its work. The light inside it gathered its strength, and then pulse. A gentle spherical wave of silvery-blue light expanded from the tower, washing out over the mist. It was not a harsh beam. It was a soft, luminous wave, like dropping a stone into a pond of light. It traveled for a mile, its edges fading softly before it vanished. Then, after 10 seconds of darkness, it pulsed again. Pulse. The mist sea, which had been white and luminous under the stars, now took on the color of the light. With every pulse, the valley was bathed in a wash of pale, ethereal blue, then returned to silver, then blue again. Pools. Elias sipped his tea. The mug was warm in his hands. The heat seeped into his palms, and the fragrant steam rose to wreathe his face. He felt completely at peace. He watched the mist, and as he watched, he began to see them. At first, they were just tiny sparks, like fireflies. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw they were not insects. They were drifting echoes, as the old books called them. Tiny, swirling motes of light, no bigger than a thumb, that rose from the mist itself. They were colorless, like tiny bits of spun glass. But when the pulse of the beacon washed over them, they would light up, some in blue, some in pale green, some in soft violet. They were drawn to the tower, slowly, in ones and twos, then in dozens, then in hundreds. They drifted toward the beacon. They did not fly. They simply rode the imperceptible currents of the air. They gathered around the lantern room, swirling in intricate, beautiful, silent patterns. It was a slow, ethereal ballet, a kaleidoscope of soft colors. Elias watched them. He knew them. They were the gentle, harmless spirits of the valley, the dreams of the sleeping trees, the memories of the stones. The light of the beacon, he believed, was a comfort to them. It was a gathering place, a home. Pools. A new color wave, and the motes all changed their hue. Pools. He drank his tea. The chair was solid beneath him. The air was cool on his face, but his chest was warm from the tea. His breathing was slow and deep, in and out. The valley breathed with him. An hour passed. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. The great river of the Milky Way had shifted, moving from one side of the dome to the other. The mist below had not stirred. It was a perfect, unbroken sea. Elias set his empty mug down. The click of the clay on the stone floor was the only sharp sound for a long, long time. He did not feel tired. He felt held. He was a small, quiet part of a very large, quiet universe. His purpose was simple: to be here. To keep the light. Why? The old book said the light was a guide. But a guide for what? There were no ships on the sea of mist. There were no travelers in the valley. Elias had his own theory. He believed the light was a guide for lost dreams. He believed that somewhere, far away, people who were lost or sad or confused would see this light in their sleep. A soft, blue, pulsing heartbeat. And it would remind them that somewhere in the world there was stillness. There was peace. It was an anchor for the soul. Pulse. A large pale shape drifted by the window. Elias leaned forward, his heart giving a gentle leap. It was the Luna veil, the moth from the book. It was even more beautiful than the illustration. It was huge, as large as Elias's 2 hands. Its wings were not silver, but a translucent, pearly white, like the inside of a seashell. It landed on the glass with an imperceptible touch. It rested there, its intricate feathery antennae twitching slowly, tasting the air, feeling the vibration of the light. The pulse of the beacon washed over it. The moth's wings caught the light, and for a moment, it glowed a brilliant angelic blue. Elias didn't move. He barely breathed. He and the moth looked at each other through the thick glass. He saw the universe reflected in its two large, dark, liquid eyes. He felt a profound sense of companionship. "Good evening, friend," he whispered. His voice sounded thick with disuse. The moth stayed for a long time. It stayed for perhaps an hour, clinging motionlessly to the glass, a silent sentinel, a fellow keeper of the watch. The mist-moths swirled around it, a congregation of light. Elias settled back into his chair. His eyes grew heavy. He did not fight the feeling. He let his eyelids droop. He was not asleep, but in a state just between. A deep, comfortable trance. He listened. He listened to the deep, resonant hum of the Lumen-stone. It was the baseline of his world. He listened to the faint, almost imaginary swish of the mist-moths as they danced outside. He listened to his own breath, slow and steady, in, out. He listened to the great, profound silence of the stars. He was safe. He was warm. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Pools. The blue light washed over his closed eyelids. Pools. The world was at peace. Pools. Time flowed by like a slow, deep river. The constellations continued their majestic, silent procession across the dome. The Luna veil moth, its visit complete, unfurled its beautiful wings and vanished into the night, a pale ghost dissolving into the starlight. Elias dozed, woke gently, dozed again. His mind was empty of worry, empty of planning. There was only the now, only the light, only the mist, and then he sensed a change. It was not a sound. It was a shift in the quality of the darkness. He opened his eyes fully. He looked to the east. On the very, very distant horizon, the deep indigo velvet of the sky was softening. A faint pale line of silvery green was appearing, just above the line of the mist. Dawn was coming. Elias watched as, slowly, miraculously, the sky began to transform. The silver green became a soft, pearly gray. The gray began to warm, tinged with the faintest, shyest blush of pink. The brightest stars began to fade, as if they were dissolving. The valley below was still in darkness, still submerged. But the sky, the upper sky, was waking up. The Lumen-stone sensed it too. The deep, resonant hum began to soften, to lessen in volume. The pulses of light became slower. Pulse. A 12-second pause. Pulse. A 15-second pause. The light was preparing to sleep, just as the world was preparing to wake. Elias stood up, stretching his arms over his head. His joints popped gently in the quiet. He felt rested, renewed. He went to the pedestal. The crystal was still bright, but its light was now competing with the growing luminescence of the morning. The mist-moths, their dance finished, were sinking back down, disappearing one by one into the white sea. Elias placed his hand on the crystal. It was warm, and it was vibrating gently, like a purring cat. "Thank you," he whispered to it. "Your work is done for now. Sleep well." He took his small, smooth river stone and placed it back in its pouch. He took the stopper for the tiny vial of dew, but he did not put it in. Instead, he upended the vial and spread the last few drops of dew over the stone. With a final sighing the light inside the crystal swirled, clouded over, and went out. The stone became opaque and milky once more. The deep vibration ceased. Silence. The lantern room was now filled with the pale, gray-pink light of the pre-dawn. Elias took a large square cloth of thick, dark velvet and gently, carefully draped it over the sleeping stone, protecting it from the coming sun. His work was done. He turned to the brass hatch and began his descent. Down, down, down the narrow spiral stairs he went. He left the cold, clear air of the summit and descended into the library. The library was dim, its thousands of books just shadowy outlines in the gray light. It smelled of paper and sleep. He did not pause. Down, down, down. Shuff, shuff, shuff. He passed his kitchen. It was cool, the scent of bread long faded, replaced by the simple, clean smell of stone. Down, down, down. He reached his own quarters. He stepped off the staircase and into his room. The mist was still thick outside his window, a blanket of pure white, pressing gently against the glass. His room was a cocoon, safe and isolated from the world. He was tired now, a deep, gentle, earned tiredness. He did not light a candle. He moved through the familiar dimness. He pulled back the heavy, soft wool quilt on his bed. The sheets were cool and smelled faintly of lavender. He took off his outer clothes, folding them neatly on his chair. He slipped into his bed, the mattress sighing softly as it took his weight. He pulled the quilt up to his chin. It was heavy and warm. It felt like a hug. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling, though he could not really see it. The mist outside his window turned the room a soft, diffused gray. From far above he could hear the first, tentative song of a morning bird, its notes sweet and clear, welcoming the sun he could not yet see. Elias closed his eyes. He breathed in the cool, quiet air of his room. He breathed out, and all the tension of the night, all the watchfulness, flowed out of him. He was safe in his tower. The light was sleeping. The mist was a blanket. The world was quiet. He let himself drift. He felt the pull of sleep as gentle and encompassing as the mist itself. His breathing slowed, becoming deep and even. He fell into a profound, peaceful, and well-deserved sleep as the first rays of the morning sun finally touched the very top of the Whisperlight Beacon. And in the stillness, all was well. Sleep well.